Hunt, and I'm going to be leading today's session on partnering with our academic colleagues. I am a senior consultant at Marts and Lundy, and I also have almost 30 years of experience working in the culture arena and higher education with lots of academic and development partners. And this is one of my favorite parts of what we do, partnering up with those who are actually doing the work that we're seeking support for. And it's an exciting part of what we do, but it can also have some challenges. And our plan is that an hour from now, you will feel like you have some tools you can use to make your partnerships with your academic colleagues more effective. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Lori DiCecco. We will have some time for questions at the end of the session, and Lori will be moderating that component of the program. As you have questions along the way, feel free to type them into the dialog box on your screen, and Lori will help you as we go along. We're an exciting and dynamic group today. We are literally a global audience because we have participation from the United States, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Singapore, and possibly a few other countries I haven't captured. So I'm excited to spend some time with you and share perspectives that can be helpful to all of us. Our academic colleagues can make things happen for our donors that we never could without them. They're the ones who can describe what we're doing and what their work is from a first-person perspective. No matter how well we as development or advancement professionals explain what our organizations do, the people who are actually doing it can do that so much more effectively. They bring our programs to life. And donors love to be able to have those direct conversations with the people who are doing what donors are interested in funding. So our academic colleagues essentially embody the investment that our donors are considering making. And that can be the key to the spark that makes the donor ready for the philanthropic investment. But not all of us find these partnerships working completely smoothly. So what are some of the things that we encounter that can go wrong in these partnerships? The first one is that sometimes our academic colleagues just don't know what they're doing in fundraising. That's not entirely surprising because they have no background in this area. They have come up through the academic world. They've earned their current positions by virtue of being excellent at their academic field, but they've never trained as development officers, and they don't know how to interact with donors. The funding they have sought has typically been from public, governmental, corporate, or foundation funders, where the process is very straightforward and not nearly as emotional and unpredictable as working with individual donors. They also don't always like to admit that they don't know what they're doing. For a senior academic, it's been a very long time since that person wasn't good at something, and it can be hard for them to acknowledge that at this senior part of their career, there is something they actually don't know anything about. And when they are working with us, and we know a lot about this field, that can feel a little destabilizing to them and make them uncomfortable. And then a huge obstacle is that they just don't have a lot of time. Their schedules are crushing. Anytime we feel like our calendar is overwhelmed, we should just look at the calendars of a senior academic and we'll see, with all of the interactions with faculty, with students, the administrative work, work with external bodies, work with external constituents, and then they add development into the mix. And in particular, working with individual donors can take a long time before we see the fruition of a major gift. And for an academic who is already pressed to fit everything into the schedule, taking on a task that can take a long time is a real challenge for them. And if they don't have time for everything that they're required to do, this often gets dropped because it doesn't have a short-term profit, and because if they're not comfortable with it, it's easiest for them to drop this because they can move back and do things they are more comfortable with. Now, when we face these obstacles, I've identified a few things here that are frustrating about the academic side of it, but it's important for us to take a look at ourselves as well. Sometimes when I join a development office that is having trouble with its relationship with its partnership out in the academy, we discover that there are some frustrations on the side of the development office that are spilling over into the relationship with the academics, and it's not a healthy way to approach them. So let's be honest here for a minute and truly candid about what we sometimes think of our development colleagues. A few minutes ago, we talked about how much we enjoy their participation in the process and how important they are, but we need to acknowledge the parts of them that we sometimes find frustrating. I will often hear a development person say, I love my dean, but I love my department chair, but I love my faculty members, but. And if we have that clause after the but, that's a reason that sometimes undermines how much we enjoy working with them, that can spill over into how they feel about working with us as well. So let's look at some of the things that we might admit to ourselves in our most private moments. Sometimes we don't trust them. I'm sure that many of you participating in this program have heard or have used the term cowboy or rogue when describing a member of the academic community, because often they do things that we find out about later, and sometimes those things are not positive. And it can be hard for us to trust them, especially if they've done that before. And then there are times that we don't respect them because we forget that there are reasons to respect them that have nothing to do with their development prowess. We're very good at fundraising. They're very good at something else. And when we bring those two things together, their area of expertise and our expertise in fundraising, it's a powerful combination. So we shouldn't be judging them based on their fundraising skills because that's really not what they have been trained to do. Sometimes we consider them a problem. Earlier this week, I was at a meeting with some fundraisers who thought there were no deans in the room, and one of them who was giving a presentation admitted that she had been known to say that a good day was a day without any academics in it. And while I suppose we all can have those feelings from time to time, when we let our feelings about the challenges of working with the academy begin to dominate, we deprive ourselves of the positive relationship that can be there, and the academics can sense from us that we're feeling frustrated. So we have to remember that even if there are little bumps in the road, they're not actually a problem. They're part of the solution to our success. Sometimes we treat them like children. We give them significant rules to follow, or we talk down to them because they don't seem to know what they're doing in development. And that is risky because they're not children. And sometimes we go even a little further with that and we treat them like criminals, particularly when we're finding them not perhaps welcoming to our policies and procedures. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about prospect management because that can be one of the most difficult areas to find a healthy balance between development and the academy. And that's often the place where we begin to feel like our academic colleagues are breaking rules, and we start to try to police them in a way that's not the best use of our time or their time. So putting aside the times that we are occasionally frustrated, how do we go about establishing a healthy partnership that focuses on those first things we talked about, the really good components of what they can bring to donor relationships? First, we start at the top. The head of your organization should happily and enthusiastically embrace fundraising and development as a part of the CEO's job, whether that's your president, executive director. If you're in a university working with a college, it might be a dean, might be a program head or a department head. The person at the top of the academic realm should be excited about being a part of fundraising and should have a very close partnership with the chief development officer. Those two together can set an example for the rest of the organization, development staff and academics alike, about how to work together and how important it is for our partnerships to be solid and therefore successful. We have to be prepared to prove ourselves again and again and again. Remember that for a lot of our academic colleagues, they are very new to the development process. And they can be very skeptical about whether a plan is going to work, particularly when they haven't spent a lot of time in solicitations or working directly with donors. They can be skeptical about whether something will work. We have to just be steady and stay true to our performance so that we can show the academics the positive nature of working with donors again and again and again. And over time, they'll become more comfortable. We should never take it personally when an academic doesn't feel great about fundraising. It's not uncommon to go into a room full of program staff like faculty members and have them say, "Oh, here comes Penny, hide your wallet. Here comes the fundraiser. Watch yourselves, she's going to pick your pocket." And they don't mean anything personal about that. They're expressing their own discomfort with fundraising. Remember, it's not a career they chose. For most of them, it came along after they had set themselves on their academic path as they rose to positions of more responsibility. So while it's fine to say to an academic that you'd prefer they not say things like that, don't take it personally when they do. That's a reflection of their discomfort with the process, not with you personally. And we need to be patient and persistent. Just as it takes time to evolve our relationships with donors to the solicitation and the major gift commitment, it also takes time for our academics to find their most successful component of development work. So we need to work with them continuously over time and not get frustrated on either side, theirs or ours, if the first few things they do in development aren't as successful or as effective as we hoped or planned that they would be. And then most importantly, we have to give them the tools they need. They probably have not had experience with developing a cultivation strategy to build a relationship with a donor. They may never have delivered a solicitation or participated in a solicitation of an individual. Their experience with solicitation may only have been in securing research funding. So they won't always know how to do what we would like them to do. And it's our responsibility to provide them with those tools, with the training, the knowledge, the support they need to test their skills and hone their skills so they become more effective over time. The best thing we can do for our program success is to set our academic colleagues up to succeed. And we can do that through a number of ways. The first thing is to determine their strengths. Think about the academic colleague you work most closely with. This might be someone who you directly staff, or it might be a small group of people you're working with on a special project. Think about that person or those people, and as a little bit of homework from today's session, take some time to write down what their strengths are. There will be a lot of them, and write them all down, both interpersonal strengths, inner strengths, academic strengths. And then look at what you would like them to be doing with your program. Sometimes we expect faculty to do something that is not actually something they're good at. An excellent example of this is the expectation that they will solicit significant gifts. Some of them will learn to do that and be great at it and love it. Others will try and will never reach a true level of comfort with the direct ask for a gift. And that's okay. They were not hired to be solicitors. They were hired with an expectation that they would have development in their portfolio. Those are two very different things. If the academic you're working with is not comfortable directly asking for money, that's okay because you are. You as the fundraiser can handle that component of the relationship while the faculty member stays in the comfort zone of what they're good at as well. I once worked with a chancellor, the head of a campus, who thought that she was terrible at development because her chief development officers had sent her out to ask for gifts, and she was terrified to ask for gifts. She just couldn't do it, and so she failed every time. When we switched the model around and sent her out with a senior fundraiser who was comfortable asking for gifts, and we had the chancellor focus entirely on talking about the program, engaging with the donor about the exciting opportunities in the program, and then the development officer asked for the gift, her success went through the roof. And if you ask any of the major donors during her leadership period at that university whether she solicited their big gift from them, they will say yes. Because while the development officer said the words of the ask, they gave because of her excitement, her vision, her connection with them. We can create that environment with our colleagues in academia as well, so that we expect of them something that aligns with their strengths. We also need to provide them consistent training over time. We can sometimes get them to come into a seminar or a session that is a one-time training opportunity, and that can set a great groundwork for them learning. Then we have to continue to train them over time, because as they practice, as they get experience out in the field, they'll need to learn more. They'll go deeper on particular subjects. And as we do that, particularly as we're practicing with them, we should give them regular feedback. Let them know what they're doing well, make constructive suggestions if there are things that are not going as well as they could, so that they get the same kind of input about how to get better that they give their students and that they're accustomed to in the academic setting. And we also want to test possible ways for them to engage. We might try something and discover that they're not particularly good at that thing, so we try something else. Don't be afraid to try something that fails, because when you have this partnership and you've shown them that you want to help them succeed, they will feel comfortable testing those limits a little bit as well. And the most important thing is to align what we ask of them with what they're good at. If we discover that something we're asking of them is not in their skill set, we should change and move on to something else. Because if they're not doing something they're good at, they won't be successful and they'll become more reluctant to be involved in our program. So let's talk a little bit about prospect management. Sometimes in academic communities, prospect management could actually be renamed as the Wild Wild West, because often we have academic colleagues and development colleagues with different understandings and expectations about how we're going to manage our relationships, and that can get a little bit crazy sometimes. So why is it that we frequently find that faculty don't comply with our prospect management policies or processes? The number one reason I've encountered is that they just don't understand why it matters. If they don't know why we're asking them to give us notes on visits they've had or tell us before they approach someone, they're going to think that it's a waste of their time and something that they shouldn't bother to participate in. They also sometimes don't trust us. You may be a very collaborative partner, but you may have had predecessors in your position who were not as productive and focused on their success as you are. So sometimes they don't trust that development will help them. I will often hear faculty say, well, I didn't tell you because I knew you would tell me not to do it. Even if that's not the case, they may have feared that they couldn't trust us to support them, and that could be driving their reluctance to participate in our prospect management processes. Often we get tarred with the central brush. We'll frequently hear our academic colleagues tell us, well, every time somebody from the central office, whether it's the budget office or the provost's office or any vice president's office, every time we hear from them, they are telling us what we can't do or telling us we have to do something we don't want to do. That can often be the case, particularly in large bureaucratic organizations. So we have to show them that as the development office, we're not here to control them or stop them from being successful. We're here to help them find ways to be successful. And then we also have to recognize that in the academy, lore lasts forever. I once had a meeting with a faculty member who complained that every time he approached the development office, he was told no, that he couldn't talk to this person or he couldn't visit that person. So I sat down with him and asked him to give me a list of all the people he had been told no about. He couldn't come up with a single name, but he had heard that that happens. It hadn't happened in a very long time, but in the academy, memories last forever. Now, sometimes when they are concerned about these areas, they're right. Sometimes we do have systems that aren't oriented toward their success. So let's think about why we want them to be a part of our prospect management process, why we want them to participate and comply. At some institutions, it's to control faculty activity because there can be activities going in multiple directions that are not productive for the donors, that don't represent the institution in a positive light, and that create confusion both internally and in the minds of the donors. Sometimes it's to keep them from causing problems. A faculty member who decides to go and visit a potential donor without telling anyone else may arrive 3 days after someone else has been there and may mess up the thought process of the donor by confusing the donor about what the institution's priorities are and what we're asking them to do. We also have sometimes worked with our academic colleagues who have shown us that we really can't trust them to be cooperative and collaborative partners in our process. And so sometimes we ask them to comply with the prospect management system because we know that in the past they have intentionally caused problems. They have done the, well, it's better to ask forgiveness than ask permission routine. And when that has happened before, it can be difficult for us to trust that they're not going to do that again. But the bottom line is we want them to comply because it's the best thing for the donor. A donor who is approached responsibly and respectfully is going to have a better relationship with our institution. Is going to be more positive about making gifts and is going to be more of an advocate for our institution. Donors don't like to think that we have problems internally, and they especially don't want to think that they're the cause for that problem. So we should never create an environment where it looks to the donor as if we can't communicate well with each other internally or we're not being respectful of their time. So how do we make it appealing for our academic colleagues to participate in our approaches to managing relationships in a way that's respectful of donors? First and foremost, we need to share why it matters. We want to show the faculty that we're doing this not so much to try and thwart anyone from being entrepreneurial about securing support for their program, but rather to ensure that as an institution, we present a clean, united front to our donors to show them that we're a well-run organization that is worthy of their investment. And we can do that by giving them concrete examples, both good examples and bad examples. Good examples where groups of development officers and faculty worked together and as a result got a larger gift than they might have gotten if they each went individually. And also, unfortunately, if you have some, you can share bad examples where donors got angry or frustrated because they weren't being treated respectfully by the institution. And one great way to make it appealing is to let the donors tell them. If you have regular faculty meetings or gatherings of your program staff, consider having a donor come and visit with that group from time to time. When they hear how much donors love to give and the joy donors receive when they make gifts, that will help your colleagues want to be more involved in the process. And that can also be a time in a Q&A session to ask a donor, how do you like to be contacted by the institution? And when your academic colleagues hear donors say, well, I don't mind talking to anyone, I just want to be sure that you are all talking to each other, that's very powerful. You want to think about eliminating the culture of no in your program. Very often, faculty say that they didn't want to tell us they were going to see someone because they figured we would tell them no. Let's not ever say no when a faculty member says, I want to visit this person or I want to go see this person. Instead, let's say, let me see what's going on with that person elsewhere in our institution to make sure that we do this in the right way. And if we find out that there is other activity going on, let's say to our faculty colleagues, Here's our situation. There are several relationships in place. Let's meet with our colleagues who already know this prospect or donor and figure out how to fit you into the overall relationship. Or let's say you absolutely can get to know this person. However, right now they're in a conversation about a solicitation, they're considering the gift. This would be a confusing time to introduce a new person. So we're going to ask that you wait until this conversation finishes, and then we'll figure out a way to bring you in. So that when faculty think about approaching someone, they will come to understand that we can help them become more effective by sharing information and helping them find the right timing, and not just expecting that they'll be told no. Adopt a philosophy for your approach. You may understand that everything you do in the relationship management part of your program is to create a good environment for donors, but faculty won't automatically know that. So it's good to have a philosophy that you can articulate very quickly to explain to anyone else in your program why you do these things. So tell them, our philosophy of relationship management is donor first, or is to make the relationship as easy as possible for the donor. Reminding them that the whole focus is on the donor will help them understand why it's important to participate. And finally, make their part of this very easy. Work with them in their offices to figure out the easiest way for them to get information from you and to share information from you. Often, if you're working with a very senior academic, there will be someone who manages their calendar and who can be a go-between to help you know what's coming up on the calendar and to give you reports on what happened after it has happened. So sit down with them and have a logistical conversation about what will make it the easiest for them to participate, and then stick with that so that difficulty and bureaucracy doesn't become an excuse for them not to play along. Now let's move along to talking about staff. Many of you on this webinar work in an environment where you have development responsibilities, but you're also part of an academic component of your institution, and so you have two managers. I saw from the registrant list that many of you are one of those managers. So I want to talk about how we work together with our academic colleagues to make sure that as we're managing staff together, we're creating the best environment possible for that co-managed staff. Because as I always like to say, when mom and dad are fighting, it's the children who suffer. And a development officer who is suffering is not going to be an effective fundraiser. So how do we create this environment of success? The first thing is that the development manager and the academic manager, the dean, the department head, must be in absolute alignment about what is expected of the development officer. That means frequent conversation, frequent meetings about many things, including how things are going with the staff. We never want a moment where a development officer has to choose, should I do this thing that will make the development office happy, or should I do this other thing that will make the faculty happy? We want to be sure that everything the development officer does is positive and successful for both components of the program. I encourage you to have your development officer drive the performance planning and evaluation process. The line officer should be the one who proposes in preparation for a year what the performance plan will look like, what the evaluation standards will be, what are the targets that person is going to be seeking, so that the manager from the academic side and the manager from the development side can respond to that, give their feedback, perhaps adjust some numbers up, adjust some numbers down, but have a true understanding of what the development officer needs in order to succeed. And we want to be sure that we look at those targets on a very regular basis. I'm a great believer that there should never be a surprise at a performance evaluation, unless perhaps it's a surprise promotion or raise. If something's going wrong, we want to see that during the year. Very often, if a development officer is not meeting the targets they have all agreed on at the beginning of the year, it's because other assignments have come onto their agenda or into their portfolio that has changed the amount of time they have available to work toward their targets. If you address this on a quarterly basis, then you can adjust that and understand how to fix it before it gets too far down the path and the development officer becomes unsuccessful and both managers are frustrated or unhappy with their performance. So those of you who are chief development officers, vice presidents or equivalents, as managers, this is your responsibility. You should be working very closely with your academic colleagues on how you will jointly manage your staff. Be very clear with them about what you expect and how you approach your officer's performance. If there are things that are absolutely mandatory in your view, be sure that the academic partner understands that so that there can be no confusion about how the development officer should be spending their time. If you work with a dean or a dean equivalent like a department head or the head of a program, talk with them a lot, frequently, so that they always understand what's going on in the development program and you always understand what's going on in their academic program. And never, ever, ever put the staff member in the middle. If there is a difference in expectations, the staff member should not be the one who has to negotiate that. That should be a conversation between the head of the academic program and the head of the development program. It's not fair to a staff member to ask them to be the ones to negotiate with you. So just in case you aren't sure how strongly I believe this, I'm going to say it one more time. Never, ever, ever, ever put the staff in the middle. Now let's finish up by talking about how we can deploy our academic colleagues successfully in our fundraising programs. We want to find ways that they can engage with donors that will be fun, interesting, productive for both the academic and the donor. And by doing that, we also expand the possibilities for how we as development officers are engaging with our donors. When we come up with a creative way for a faculty member and a donor to interact, that puts something else on our list of things we can do with the donor as well. Those of you who have been in development for a long time know the frustration of the repeated office meeting where you go to visit a prospect in the office, they talk for a little while, you talk for a little while, and then you do it again a little while later. We're always looking for ways to do something different that will strengthen the engagement that our donors have with our programs. And our academic colleagues can be a really great part of doing that. Of course, we can always engage them in cultivation calls as we're cultivating relationships that we hope will turn into donor relationships. Bringing an academic along with you to a meeting can add a level of excitement and enthusiasm and interaction for the donor that can really move their thinking forward about making a gift. We can do this when the donor comes on campus or when we go to visit the donor. You will find that many of your academic colleagues are very willing to travel with you, whether locally or afar, to meet face-to-face with donors. And especially as they do it more and more and come to see how enjoyable it is, you'll find them eager to participate. They're a great part of small get-togethers. Hosting a dinner where a faculty member engages with the group and talks about what's going on in the program or about their personal research can be really inspirational to the donors and can help you see how they respond to these ideas and which of them might want to talk further about supporting what they're hearing about. When you have campus visits with potential donors, whether individually or in groups, engage your faculty. I worked once with a dean of a college and a university who had an advisory board. And he had an extremely successful advisory board because every time they met, they had minimum of 3 in-depth encounters with 3 very different kinds of faculty members. In a lab, walking around the campus, in a classroom. And while those advisory board members were on campus, the program really came to life by virtue of the time they spent with the academic colleagues. They can be a great liaison between students and alumni or other supporters who are interested in what students are doing. Students are so inspirational to donors because often they remind the donors of what they were like as young people, and they see in current students the promise of the future They see in them the potential that they had when they were just beginning their academic careers, preparing for their life careers. An academic can provide an opportunity, for example, judging a research contest or bringing a graduate to speak to similar program area students. There was a client I had who had an engineering program that had a standing program called Lunch with an Engineer, and they would bring a successful graduate to campus to have lunch with engineering students with no formal agenda, just to talk about the field, how this graduate got his or her start, what students could be thinking about. This was an extraordinary experience for the students and for the speakers who came. And those speakers were often excited to talk about student support based on those interactions they had had. And then we can also sometimes engage our potential donors to enhance the curriculum in our programs. If you find someone in your donor pool who has an interest or expertise in a particular area, you can offer to introduce faculty members to these alumni or other potential supporters so that the faculty can think about whether this might be a resource for them. Now, we never want to promise everyone we meet with that they could guest lecture in a class because that's not always possible for the way our curriculum is structured. But you will find that sometimes a faculty member welcomes having someone from the outside come to meet with a class to illustrate things that they've been studying or to talk about future paths. And this can be a great way for you to accompany a potential donor into this activity where you see how they talk about themselves, how they interact with the students, and you can use that as an opportunity to deepen their engagement with your program. So in closing, let's remember a few things. We will be so much more successful with our academic colleagues than without them. They bring our programs to life, and donors love interacting with them. When we give them the opportunity to expose themselves to donors, they grow as well. And you will frequently find that an academic who is very reluctant in the beginning to participate in any kind of development activity out of fear that it will be a harsh solicitation or something that will make them uncomfortable, once they've done it a few times and they see how exciting it is and what great people they get to meet, they will become eager to participate. And we will have more successful relationships with donors because of that. Let's remember also that sometimes our academic colleagues are quirky, but they're worth it. Think about software programs you have that have particular things you have to work around or deal with that you willingly do because the software accomplishes something for you that has such great value to what you do. Our academic colleagues are just like that. Sometimes we have to bend the way we do things because they have particular quirks, like they only like to talk to people in the morning, or because they're not really good in groups of people, only individuals, or because they don't like to ask for money, it makes them uncomfortable. But we can work with those quirks because the positive benefits of having them in these relationships far outweigh any inconvenience that might be required to work with their eccentricities. It is our job to be flexible. We need them in order to be successful. They need us in order to be successful. We are the ones who should expect to be flexible in our relationships with our academic colleagues. We should be the ones to look for the way to make something work with their schedule, to make something work with their strengths, to figure out the best ways for them to engage. When we are flexible, we create an environment where the faculty member will enjoy their part in the development process. When they enjoy it, they'll want to do it more. If we are rigid and we require that everything be done the same way for every single faculty member, we may not hit with every single person we work with. Some of them may not enjoy it and may not want to continue to do it. When we're flexible and we create that environment where they're comfortable and successful, they'll want to do this more and more, and you will find over time that they become flexible as well. they become willing to try new things or to consider your way of doing something that they think they know how to do. So be prepared to bend a little as you build these relationships because it will be worth it in the end. And creativity counts. Across our webinar participation today, we have just about every academic area you could possibly imagine. And every one of you will have unique relationships with the academic colleagues you work with. That's what makes working with academics so exciting and interesting. We get to interact with all kinds of different disciplines in the academy. We get to hear about research and student activity that we might not otherwise know anything about. So let that inspire your creativity. Based on the field and the personality of the academic you're choosing to work with, be creative about what can be done in that environment that will make a good experience for the faculty member and will also open your prospects and donors to experiences they might not otherwise ever have had. When we do that, both sides of that relationship get closer, enjoy it more, and move toward the ultimate productivity, which is we hope will be support for our program. Now, there are so many of you from so many different fields today that I want to be sure we have ample time to answer questions you may have that are particular to your circumstances. So Lori, I'll open this up to you and let's move into questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Penny. And we do actually have several questions coming in, and I would encourage folks on the call to please feel free to send your questions in to me. And if we don't finish answering them all today, I will make sure Penny has them, and we will follow up with you on them. So Penny, here's a few. One person asks, how do you bridge the gap between the academic and budget planning that's required of the deans and the development planning that's required by the advancement office to have a successful fundraising campaign?
Oh, that is a great question. There's a type of goal setting that makes my hair stand on end, which I refer to as the subtraction method, where the academic program plots the budget for the year. They figure out where their funding will come from, perhaps the campus, perhaps federal or local funds, auxiliary funds, and whatever is left over, they present to the development office as, here's what you need to raise for the year. And that is a sure recipe for a disaster because it doesn't take into account whether the development program has the potential donor constituency to give at that level, and it doesn't take into account whether the donor constituency will be interested in giving to the things that are left on the subtraction list. I encourage you to build a relationship with your academic colleagues, the ones who manage the budget and the leaders of your organizations, whether it's a department, a program, a college, a university, a school, to be a part of that budget planning process very early, from the very beginning, sitting in on those meetings, talking with the head of the program about what development can provide in the process, particularly educating them about your prospect pool. What does your pipeline for giving look like? How many solicitations can you expect to make in the coming year? What is the role of the annual fund in the financing of the program? What are your top donors interested in supporting? If you're sharing that all through the process, both during budget meetings and on an ongoing basis, they will come to better understand that you don't just have a list of donors waiting to write checks for whatever the program might need. You can help them see that while you can make a priority of trying to build relationships around the areas where support is needed, you can't guarantee that those relationships will mature into major gifts on the timeline of the program's expectations. It's also a very good idea to engage your managing academics, the ones who make the ultimate budget decisions, with donors. The more they hear donors talk about what they care about, the more they realize that donors won't be told what to give. They'll give to what inspires them, the better they'll understand that they can't just assign you a number and expect that you'll be able to find that money.
So Penny, as a follow-up question is that this same person asks about, how to encourage better strategic planning, how to make sure that the fundraising priorities are in line with a well-articulated academic vision. And it sounds like part of what you were just saying is answering that question in terms of ongoing discussion. But do you want to elaborate on that just a bit as it regards strategic planning and aligning vision?
It's so important for the development officers to be a part of any strategic planning team. It's a mistake to come up with a strategic plan and then show it to the development office and say, how will you fund this? If your program doesn't automatically think about having development involved in the beginning, you should be assertive and present yourself and say to your lead academics, I'd like to be part of this process, whether as an active participant or even if you just allow me to be there listening, so that I can begin to develop a sense of how we will be able to structure development results around the areas of priority. That gives you the opportunity then, if something is gaining steam and seems to be moving toward being a major priority, you can start looking at whether there's a way to develop donor support for that. And if there's not, you can be alerting your academic colleagues that you may, as a group, need to be looking outside of philanthropy for ways to fund that program.
Okay. So this is an interesting question that you'll like to answer. How many academics are too many to have in a room when you're asking for a gift?
That's a great question. I always like solicitations to include at least 2 people, unless it's a smaller solicitation where a development officer can go alone. I would say that a development officer and no more than 2 academics should be in the room. You always want to have in the room the person who best embodies what the donor might support. That doesn't mean that that person has to be there for the whole solicitation. One of my favorite solicitation techniques is for the head of a program and a development officer to take a potential donor into a laboratory or a classroom or a gallery space or an athletic field to visit briefly with someone in the program they're about to solicit for, a faculty member, a coach, a curator. Visit for maybe 20 minutes or so. The donor will get very excited about the realities of supporting that program, and then the development officer and the head manager go to a private place and ask for the gift. So it may be that that faculty member or coach or curator best embodied the program, but doesn't necessarily have to be in the room for the whole solicitation. In fact, sometimes you can say glowing things about that person more effectively if they're no longer with you. You can say, wasn't she terrific? I really believe in her. I'm supporting her through my resources. Won't you make a gift to support her as well? Beyond 3 people, I think it becomes too complicated for the conversation to flow smoothly, and it begins to feel more like a committee meeting than a conversation about a gift.
So this is a question I think we'll definitely want to get answered before the webinar ends, because I bet it's on lots of folks' minds. Somebody asks, what do you do with the dean who, for whatever reason, is a bit threatened or a bit reluctant to share time with a faculty representative who may actually be the better person to be involved in these conversations?
That is a tough one, and unfortunately not uncommon. A lot of our chief academic officers, and in universities, in university colleges, those are frequently deans. In independent schools, they're the head of school. Possibly in a cultural organization, it will be the head of a museum or the head of an arts organization. As we talked about earlier, development is not always in their natural strength set. And development can involve hearing no. Sometimes donors just aren't ready to support us or aren't interested in what we do. And for someone like a dean who has not spent years and years and years practicing that and understanding that that's not personal, it can be very destabilizing for them to enter into development relationships. It can make them feel very vulnerable, and that's no one likes to feel vulnerable, particularly someone who has become so senior in their career. And so often when you see this behavior, the dean is worried that the faculty member will take away the relationship, that the faculty member will be so great with the donor that the donor will latch on to the faculty member. And remember that deans have to show their provosts or presidents that they're being successful in development. And sometimes they forget that one way for them to be successful is to show the president or the provost how much they have involved their faculty in the development process. In just a couple of weeks, I'm going to visit a university, not for the whole university, but because a dean is bringing me to train her faculty members so that her program will have a broader reach, because her faculty will understand how to recognize signs of interest, how to interact with donors. So one thing we can do in a situation like that is help our deans see that engaging the faculty member is another way of showing success. And we can gently hint to the dean, won't it be great when you can show the president that you are doing this, that you're training up your faculty members, that you're going deeper into these relationships. You also can introduce the faculty member into the relationship in more group-like settings. If you have a small event for donors and the particular donor is going to be there, you can have the faculty member there in a casual social way. They might be able to connect in that way without the dean feeling that it's a targeted approach. But generally, if you remember that this is happening because the dean is feeling nervous or insecure, you can help her or him begin to see that involving other people actually will make him or her more successful, not less so.
This may be our last question. We might have time for one more after this, but Penny, someone asks, what are some effective strategies for working with faculty that are possessive of a donor?
Oh, that never happens. Faculty do tend to be very possessive of pretty much everything, because when you think about the environment on a lot of college or university campuses, there is an ongoing competition for resources, for space, for budget dollars, for student support. And so a lot of times our faculty have learned that they need to hold tightly to whatever they have, because if they let go of something, they may never get it back. And while that may be true of space or of budget dollars, when it spills over into development relationships, that's not always the best thing for the donor. One technique you can use is to show the faculty member, just as we were talking before about how to show the dean that letting a faculty member into the relationship is another version of success. You can put the faculty member in the position of saying, you can do this for the donor by opening the donor to other possibilities, to meet a dean, to meet some students, to meet some other faculty members. You can also get the dean on your side to say to the faculty member, I will never ask this donor for anything but a gift to your program, but I need you to be more open in the way we work with this person. Some faculty members live in a relatively closed environment where they work in their discipline with their students, with other faculty in their field, and they lose their perspective on the larger society of the university. And that can be a negative thing for a donor. If you invite a faculty member and this donor they're possessive of to an activity, to go to a cultural activity or an athletic activity, that can give you a way of bringing the faculty member out a little bit without asking them to separate from the donor. And the minute the donor expresses interest in anything else, in meeting other people and going to activities, then you have the opening of saying, I'm not trying to take this person away from you. I'm trying to help you meet this person's wishes so their relationship with your program will be stronger.
So perhaps we do have time to squeeze one more question in. So what are strategies for dealing with faculty who approach the advancement office to help them when the dean has already determined that this particular faculty's program is not a funding priority?
That's a very common problem, so I'm glad this question was asked. I think probably every university environment where there are deans of colleges face this problem, and you see it also in smaller organizations writ large, like colleges and independent schools, where choices have to be made about priorities. And the leader of that unit, whether it's the college president, the head of school, the dean of a program, the executive director of a program, has to make those final decisions. We hope those are made in the context of a strategic plan and dialogue among the program's community. Once those decisions have been made, as development officers, we can then say to the head of the program, we're going to focus on these priorities. We're going to try and find donors who are interested in these areas. We're going to share information about these areas with potential donors, hoping that they will find interest in them. And, head of program, we need your help to help the rest of the program understand why these are our development priorities. I have never yet met a development office that was overstaffed and had so many development officers they just couldn't figure out what to do with all of them. It's almost guaranteed that your resources in your development office are very limited, and you just can't go help everyone who is deserving of your help. When someone comes to you and says, I need you to help me raise $500 to bring a speaker to campus, or I need you to help me raise $10,000 to buy this piece of equipment, your first response should always be, have you talked with the dean about this? Because the dean should be the one to sign off on what those priorities are. And if this person's area of interest has not been identified as a priority, they need to work that out on the academic and program side of the house before development gets involved. And if the faculty member says, oh, we don't need to do that, you just go ahead and help me, your next response is, I'll put this on the agenda for my next meeting with the dean to get her input, to find out from him where this fits in the priorities. Since we're a small office, we can't raise money for everything, and we look to the dean to help us figure out where to allocate our time. Because this is not a problem the development office should have to solve. You never want to be seen as playing favorites among your academy. You want to be seen as facilitating the priorities the institution or the program have established and bringing resources to the table as best you can. Now, thank you all for joining us. We have reached the end of our hour. As we mentioned before, we will be sending out a link tomorrow to the recording of this program in case you'd like to revisit it or look through the slides again. And that will also include my email. So if you have further questions or would like to be in touch, please feel free to reach out. I would be happy to engage with you. Thank you so much on behalf of my colleague, Lori DiCecco and Martson Lundy. We appreciate you participating today.